Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Dolores Tarver. I'm a licensed psychologist here in Georgia, and it is time for the TT Time with Dr. Tarver is a wellness-based podcast. It is not intended to be a substitute for a relationship with a licensed mental health provider. Welcome to April. These months continue to just fly by. Here we are in another season of the year as we really fully get into spring this month. And I know for a lot of believers, you celebrated Holy Week, Resurrection over this past week. And so this feels like a time of renewal and us really thinking about how we want to move forward in preparation for this next quarter. This month is a lot of awareness activities too. April is very full of, I think, things that really reflect all that we deal with. Black Maternal Health Week happens in April. It's Minority Health Month, Stress Awareness Month, Alcohol Awareness Month, Autism Acceptance Month, Counseling Awareness Month, and Sexual Assault Awareness and Prevention Month. So, as I was trying to think about what the theme for this month would be, I thought, okay, there's no way you can cover all of those things. But I think I ultimately decided what I'll do is try to group some things together and just give some highlights. And then, of course, you all can do your deep dive in later on. But I did want to raise awareness to quite a few of those. So I'm going to try to do my best to be concise and group them together in this month. So I thought it fitting to start off by talking about stress. I think that it is inevitable that we're going to deal with stress in our lives, that we are going to plan things and they don't work out the way we planned. No matter how far in advance you planned it, no matter how meticulous you were in ensuring you had all of the available information and you made the best choices, sometimes things just don't work out. There are going to be challenges with your children. There are going to be challenges with your car, with your house, with your job. There's going to be challenges with your health. There are going to be times when you're not treated well. There are going to be times when you don't get the service and the quality of service that you deserve. There are going to be times when you're given information or given medication or given some advice and you end up recognizing that it's not the best fit for you and that it maybe even put you in a worse situation that you were in before. It is impossible for us not to experience stress, regardless of whether it is actual stress that happened to us, there is an actual threat, something that causes us to have to deal with a situation, or it's perceived because sometimes we can create our own stress, as we talked about last month when we ruminate on things. But I do think it's important for us to understand, regardless of why we experience it, if there is a perceived threat or us being significantly overwhelmed, it does set off alarms in our body. So, adrenaline, you've heard of adrenaline. That is what allows us to be able to get through situations. That's what allows us to be able to push harder when we exercise. That's the excitement that we get when we do things that take a little bit of a risk. But it makes our heart beat faster and it causes our blood pressure to go up. But it does give us more energy, which is why we'll hear the phrase adrenaline junkie because people want to chase that high. However, what happens when we are stressed out, the primary stress hormone, cortisol, you've heard me reference that before, also make sure that we have additional glucose in our body, our sugar in our bloodstream. And it increases this substance in our body in order for us to be able to repair tissues. However, cortisol also slows down anything that it deems in the body to not be essential or that could be harmful in fight or flight. It changes our immune system. I did a show last night with Reverend Amaryllis West, and we were talking about anniversary reactions or anniversary trauma reactions. And so, what happens in our bodies, even though we may not necessarily be thinking about a traumatic or a very stressful event, what happens is it will show up in our bodies and we'll start experiencing things and we won't know why. that can affect our digestive system, that can affect our attention and our concentration. Um, that can cause us to have breakouts. It will cause us to be hypervigilant and fearful, like we need to get out of a situation. Because when adrenaline and cortisol levels drop after we feel like this perceived threat is over, then everything is supposed to go back to a typical level. However, sometimes we don't ever get in the place where we are out of that stress, that there is constantly things that we're dealing with. We constantly feel like we're under attack. We don't actually deal with the things that are stressful to us. And so then there's this long term activation. So our stress response system is constantly in motion. And so now, because I have this exposure to cortisol over prolonged periods of time and other stress hormones, now I'm causing damage to my body and I'm disrupting it. We talked yesterday about the changes we experience in our hearts, which is why we're at higher risk for cardiac events, heart attacks, high blood pressure, stroke. This is why we have difficulty being able to sleep when we're under a lot of stress. Our stomachs get upset. We talk about a lot of GI issues and I don't feel right in my stomach. Headaches. Some people will experience migraines. There's that neck and back tension. I have constantly have this tightness right here in my shoulders and my neck. And that is one because I don't like massages; they hurt. But two, it's because that is where a lot of women and people in general tend to carry our stress. That neck, shoulder, back area, which is why a lot of times that's where we experience that pain. But you can experience leg cramps. You can have the weight gain because unfortunately, again, like we're shutting down what we consider to be non-essential systems. And so what I'm going to do is everything I take in, I'm going to hold on to because I feel like I may need it to deal with this particular threat. Now, some of us may be at higher risk than others. And as we talk about Minority Health Month, we recognize that it is important for us to understand that there are certain risk factors for Black, Indigenous, and people of color simply because of the disproportionate burden of premature death, illness that is often associated with, and there are any number of things, right? So we have biological vulnerabilities, we have family dynamics that contribute, community, the environment, financial distress, lack of insurance, the social cultural determinants, healthcare, a host of things that increase those risk factors. And so, what that means is often people of color may be experiencing higher levels of stress, but they may not necessarily deem it as stress because, again, after a prolonged period, we start to normalize things and we don't even realize we're stressed. So we're carrying these things around, and that may mean it takes us longer to go see someone, and that we're often not going to go and see someone until there's a significant health issue we can no longer ignore. And so we know that prevention is always better than intervention. So the longer I wait and the less preventative things I have in place. And again, there are a lot of factors that come into that. Sometimes people are working multiple jobs, and so they don't have a lot of self care time. Sometimes self care isn't anything that's being reinforced. Sometimes we, particularly in the faith community, say, well, I don't have anything that I should be stressed about. I'm blessed. I have so much. I shouldn't be complaining. I should be grateful. And I do absolutely encourage positive thinking. It is also important for us to be honest about what we're experiencing and learn how to express our emotions and release. And some of us just didn't grow up in environments and spaces that allowed us to feel like we could do that. And oftentimes what ends up happening is there comparison behavior where people tell us, well, it could be worse, which minimizes what we're experiencing and also makes it feel like, well, this isn't anything that I really need to be attending to. They just kind of suck it up. So, what are our risk factors? Breathing, life. So, that's the short answer. But truthfully, if we look at the majority of areas where people would say they're stressed, I'm sure you can guess this because this can be an area of support for people and it can also be an area of distress for people. And that's relationships. That might be with your family, intimate partners, friendships, co workers, your faith based organizations, your members there, community organizations of which you're a part. And unfortunately, because as much as we like to say, it does not bother us. We don't think about or worry about what people think of us. Of course it does. We also are often socialized to be caregivers and take care of people. Some of us are codependent in relationships. Some of us don't feel like we have worth and value outside of relationships. We'll show up for other people in ways that we don't show up for ourselves. We want to have control over things, and so we take on all of these things, partly so we'll know it's done right, is what we tell ourselves, but partly because we like being able to be validated when we get things done. We like people to be able to come to us. We like to have some semblance of and sense of power, especially when we feel very disenfranchised. And so we end up taking on all of these things. Some of us are caregiving. We mentioned Autism Acceptance Month. And what we know is like learning how to navigate in a family where you have a child that's on the spectrum can be very challenging. Being in a relationship with someone who's on the spectrum can be very challenging. And there's a lot of things, even in your preparation and your planning, and you've set up all of these great things. You got all the support early on, you got the diagnosis early on, you put a lot of things in place. There is still, again, a lot of things that are outside of our control. And so being able to manage and navigate, and particularly with people judging you, talking about your ability to parent, you need to get your child under control. That's an excuse for them. You need to be firm. You need to give them these punishments. And as we're trying to navigate spaces where we learn how to be able to express ourselves, and also be able to manage things that we weren't necessarily inherently given, that feel at odds with us and how we see the world, can be a very challenging component of caregiving. But what if your partner gets sick? What if your partner dies? What if you have children that have come back home and they have children and now you're taking care of their children? What about divorce, or if there's abuse in the relationship? What if there's conflict in your work environment? There's poor working conditions. Your managers don't know how to communicate very well. Maybe there's instability. There may be layoffs constantly going on. We just talking about in California how they raised the minimum wage for fast food workers, and a lot of business owners are saying they may have to hire less people, lay off people, or some businesses saying that they're going to close down. So imagine being in spaces where you think, okay, I'm finally going to be able to get a livable wage, only to learn that maybe your hours are going to be cut, that you're going to be taking on more responsibility because there are going to be less people there. Maybe there's going to be now unrealistic expectations of you. And possibly, as we know, when customers get frustrated, they do tend to take it out on the employees. So, work can also be that significant source of stress. And finances. Sometimes, because we're in jobs that don't allow us to be able to effectively manage all our expenses, we end up in a lot of debt. Or maybe we don't have the capacity to be able to put money into savings. The bills have gotten higher, but my income hasn't. Then we've got inflation. We talk about the high interest rates on getting a home, but at the same time, I'm throwing money away when I'm renting. And what about the unexpected expenses? I need a new car, I need tires. There's an accident. What if my insurance gets dropped? What if there's some kind of error with the bank? What if my identity is stolen? So these are all of the kind of challenges that we end up experiencing, which can lead to health issues, which is another big source of stress for us. Now, the health issues might be something acute. It may be something that maybe I get a cold, maybe I get the flu, um, maybe I trip, fall, break my ankle. But it may be something that's more chronic. It could be heart disease or hypertension. Maybe I'm dealing with chronic fatigue. Maybe I've got an autoimmune disorder. Maybe I've got diabetes. I've learned that maybe I've got cancer. And these are some things that can be very challenging to manage in a family because, one, what's my insurance coverage? Because we know that having insurance doesn't necessarily mean you have coverage. What am I expected to pay? And what about that high deductible that I have? Because I had to pick this high deductible plan so I wouldn't have to pay so much in my premiums monthly. And so we can be dealing with a lot of things. And there are so many things that aren't covered. If you have an addiction, for example, Trying to get coverage for a substance abuse program can be very challenging. Trying to get coverage for a eating disorder can be very challenging. What if I've got a food addiction? What if I'm struggling with obesity? What if I'm struggling with gambling? What if I'm struggling with pornography? This is, again, Alcohol Awareness Month, and a lot of times to deal with our stress, we end up using alcohol as a way to be able to manage and kind of put ourselves at ease, even if temporarily. And because alcohol tends to be more readily available, and one used to argue cheaper, but it depends now, then that is something that I might be willing to spend that money on, because at least I feel like maybe I can get a little bit more bang for my buck, particularly if I am able to negotiate what brands and what kind of alcohol I like. And then we talk about chronic mental health, mental illness. Like sometimes we just have a grief reaction. We may have stress. I experience anxiety, but I don't have a disorder. I experience some depression, but I cycle out of it and it's not a disorder. But other times, when it's a chronic illness, like I am not going to cycle out of that depression and it be gone. I'll cycle in and out of depressive episodes throughout my life. Bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, our attention deficit and hyperactivity disorders. And even though some children do grow out of them, not everyone does. And so I'm having to manage mental health. And as we know, mental health is treated very differently than medical health. And so your coverage may not even be the same for your mental health disorders. And so now I'm stressed about how I'm going to be able to afford this mental health medication that they haven't created a generic for yet. But the one that works really well for me costs me $150 a month. I can't afford that. $300 a month. I can't afford that. So then do I end up just getting on a medication that helps with some things, even though it doesn't help as well other things, or it has side effects? And then there's the cognitive piece, as we've talked about before, just that doom and gloom. Like I just feel like life is kicking me in the teeth. Um, it's not going to get better. And we get this sense of kind of hopelessness. I don't know what the future may hold because there's constantly things going on. You look at the news and you see all these negative things, and it makes you feel very overwhelmed. And then the relationship piece, if that's not going well, or I'm stressed, I'm caregiving, then I feel like, okay, well, this isn't going to end. Maybe I have a loved one with dementia and they've had dementia and I've been caregiving for them for 15 years. Or maybe I'm dealing with a loved one whose medical health has gotten worse. So now they've gotten to the point where they need full care, but we don't have the capacity, or maybe don't want to put them in a healthcare facility. And so I'm taking on the responsibility of trying to manage their full term needs, in addition to all of the things that I have going on. So you can imagine what some of the negative self talk may be in that situation. And then I've got to deal with the trauma of discrimination, or everything that's going on in this world of politics, and how people are telling us what to do with our bodies and when and how, and changing laws around what we can read, and us making sure there's equity, right? So we're really struggling with a lot of different things in the environment around us. So it is understandable that in this prolonged stress, we're going to be a little irritable and angry and nervous and anxious, and our thoughts are going to race, and we're having difficulty being able to relax. And now I'm having a lack of interest in things because I don't want to go outside of my house. And now my conditions are getting worse, whether that's mental or physical. And now I'm experiencing um, diarrhea, and I'm missing work, and I'm finding myself not able to get back to the place of even just feeling good. And so this is affecting me, impacting me in a lot of different areas. I'm not going out with friends as much. I'm not going maybe to church as much. I'm again calling out of work. Right. So now I've got all of these other factors on top of all of my other stress. And so you can see how it can easily get to be a cycle. So, what do we do to manage our stress? There isn't any one way that you're going to say, hey, I do this without a doubt, it's going to work every single time. Most of the time, we have to have a variety of things, a stress management toolkit, if you will. When I was speaking last night, I talked about you want to be able to be in that prevention mode. So let me go ahead and create some things. Some of you have been in stress for a long time, so it'll end up being intervention for you at this point. But you may be at a point in your life where you've cycled out of some things that's not as stressful. This is a good time to be preventative. Regardless of the case, what's going to be included in that toolbox? You know, absolutely, it's Counseling Awareness Month, so you are definitely going to get that plug for therapy, right? So, being able to have a coach or a therapist to be able to work you and walk you through learning some stress management techniques can be really helpful, particularly if you don't even know what causes you stress or that you're stressed. So, that may be your first step is understanding, like, am I stressed? I thought this was kind of my natural state of being. So, being able to really understand that. And then also, like that faith component, we know that religious coping, spiritual coping, can be a very huge asset to us in stress management. One, because it reminds us that we're not in things alone. Two, it allows us to understand that there is this essence of love, this however you look at in terms of faith, whether that's God, Yahweh, Jehovah, whatever that is for you, the ancestors, that you know that you can be in a place of stillness and be able to have a voice speak to you and kind of help you through things. It gives you hope. It allows you to be able to recognize that what you're going through is temporary, and even if it doesn't, the circumstance doesn't change. How I look at it may be able to change. I may be able to get some additional resources to be able to alleviate some of the stress. That support system is super important. And what we recognize is the support system actually has to be supportive. You've heard me say that before, because if the people in your life are critical and they are pulling more from you, they're not pouring into you, then it's not really support. It is you extending yourself in yet another way that's going to leave you feeling depleted. So you want to make sure that you have an adequate support system. And that may look like a lot of things. That might be a coping group. So it might be a support group that is well versed in, it might be grief, it may be caregiving for someone on the spectrum, it might be caregiving for someone that's got dementia related disorder, it may be a support group for people with chronic illnesses, it may be a support group for people who have family members that have addictions. And so there are a lot of different ways that you can get that support group. That might be through a church, but that also may be through counseling resources. It may even be something that's virtual. You may not have anything in your area, but you're able to get on video to be able to get that support. And what I would encourage you is, a lot of times people are like, oh, I don't like support groups, I don't want to be around other people. That doesn't have to be your primary mechanism for being able to get some resources, but it could be a component of that. So don't cheat yourself out of something that could be potentially helpful for you. Now, when it's not helpful is when we don't feel like we're getting resources. So sometimes what ends up happening is a group will kind of morph, and sometimes it may be that people continue the group on, but there's not actually a professional leading the group. So you want to make sure that there is a professional in there that can be able to support you so that you have resources to ensure that you're actually getting some of the things that you need. I also think it's very important for us to have realistic schedules. And I know that when we're stressed and we have all of these things that need to be done, we'll write all of them down and we think, okay, well, if I just go ahead and knock them out, they'll be over with and I don't have to worry about it. But I will encourage you to have a realistic schedule so that you give yourself adequate time to be able to complete things, and that it is something that can be completed, because sometimes we're setting goals that we are not able to complete, right? So to think that I'm not going to be dealing with a chronic illness, that it's going to go away, may not necessarily be a realistic goal for you. And I am a person of faith, and I recognize that there are all kinds of things that are possible. And I also recognize that sometimes what we may want and what actually happens is not the same thing, right? And so you keep those prayers. Those prayers are important. That prayer for total wellness and healing, and also the prayer to be able to manage the things we cannot change, and recognizing our limitations, in sometimes being able to have the things the way we want, how we want. But that's what faith is being able to recognize that even though I don't have control over this, I know that whoever does is guiding and leading me in this process. So let me do what I can. And it allows you to be able to reframe what you're experiencing. Perception really is very important when you're dealing with stress management, because whatever I believe again affects how I behave. And so if I think I'm going to fail, if I think this is something I'll never be able to get through, if I think that nobody's here to support me, if I think um, that this is just my life and I need to learn to that I won't be happy again, then that is going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's going to happen. And so sometimes being able to get outside of my own head and be able to talk to other people about different strategies can allow me to be able to see a situation differently. Exercise is so very important, and it really does not matter, truthfully, what kind of exercise, as long as you're getting heart rate up. Now, we do know as we get older, we lose muscle mass, and so being able to incorporate some weights can be important, but I do want you to just start. And so, if you're not at that point where you're able to walk and do weights, do some chair exercises. If you're able to get out and walk, but you're not able to necessarily lift anything heavy, then walk. So there's a lot of different ways that you want to take some pressure off your body and your joints, like get in that pool. So there's a lot of different options for you. And it is important for you to talk to a provider, someone who either specializes in exercises or your medical doctor, to be able to understand what you're capable of doing. Some of you are in physical therapy, you may be getting exercises from physical therapy, but exercise is a really good way to be able to relieve stress. I also think it's important for us to, particularly when we feel overwhelmed, to get some organization. There's a saying that you can tell if a woman's mind is cluttered by how she keeps her purse. A lot of times for us, you can look at our environments and see the chaos and recognize that we just are disheveled, disorganized, like there's just so much going on in our heads. So get some organization. And it doesn't mean that you have to be immaculate with your organization, that everything has to be structured and color coded, but it does mean that you need to have a plan. And it does mean that you need to recognize what's my priority, what are things that I want to get to, but they're not necessarily what I need to be attending to right now, and what are things that I just need to remove from my plate. They're not even things that I'm going to be able to attend to in this moment, either because they're not anything that I can do anything about, or it requires a next level of steps and I haven't gotten there yet. And also be able to track your progress and see where you are, so you can be able to see, like, oh, hey, I am actually being able to make a dent in some things. I am able to see some different outcomes. It is so important what you put in your body. That goes not only to your food and your drink, but also what you're putting in terms of your social media, what you're listening to on the radio, what you're listening to on television. And sometimes we do need to take breaks from things that are not necessarily helpful for us. We can deep dive on TikTok and go down the rabbit hole. We can be on social media scrolling, 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 looking at other people's lives and being in present moments, or daydreaming about things and not being in our present. And it's important for us to be in our present. What do I need? What does my body need? Maybe I need to be attending to my emotions right now. Maybe I'm not eating well, and that's also affecting how I'm sleeping. It's affecting how I feel in my body and why I'm having these digestive issues. And so when we have plant-based things, things that are easier for our body to be able to break down, when you're doing that good protein, that healthy protein, then it allows for you to be able to get those stress levels lower, right? When you get that water, I'm talking to myself, in the way that you need to, it allows you to be able to flush toxins from your body. It allows you to be able to get your heart rate back down, and it also allows your blood pressure to be better, because what ends up happening is our heart rate goes up and our blood pressure goes down when we're really stressed out, or the other way around, the heart rate can go really high and the blood pressure can go really high. And so it just depends on where you are in terms of the stress cycle. And so it's important for you to be able to take good care of you during those times and recognize, like, hey, I need to eat, I need my rest, and I need to make sure that I'm hydrated, because the dehydration is what can cause that fluctuation in that blood pressure to go down. Being mindfully present in this moment, in this space, journaling, doing yoga, making time for hobbies, listening to music, listening to a good podcast. Those are things that can be really helpful because they can pour back into you. So what we want to really be really mindful of is not doing the things that deplete us and not being able to really pour back in to ourselves. It is very important for us to laugh. We need to have a sense of humor. We need to, but not the jokes at other people's expenses, not the negative things where I'm self-deprecating and making fun of myself. but like the things that really give me joy and make me smile. Sometimes volunteering can give that to us, but I want to be very clear with you. Like, if your plate is already full and you've got a lot of things stressing you, don't you take on one more thing, because oftentimes we can end up focusing on other people because we don't really want to focus on ourselves. And that's when the organizing and prioritizing becomes really important, because I need to understand what it is that I need to have as my emphasis right now. I think that it's inevitable that you will come to a point in your life where you recognize that the things that you are trying are not working, and you may need to regroup, and that's okay too. Sometimes we do need to take some time and really think about, okay, hey, this worked previously but it's not working now, and that's why that toolkit becomes in really handy, because then I can pull some other things from here. I can try some different things. I might do a bubble bath, I might do some coloring, I might have a spa day. I might be able to recognize that, hey, I need to switch up who I'm talking to in the support system, or maybe I'm not talking to people and I need to talk to people. And so those may be some of the changes. Maybe I realized that the church home wasn't necessarily the best fit for me and I need to find a different church home. So it's just important for you to understand that even if you've been doing something, that doesn't mean you have to keep doing it, particularly if you recognize that it's not helpful to you, or it at the very least isn't working in the same way that it did. Um, I always leave my emails with my clients to take good care. So that's how I'll leave you all with this podcast. Take good care of you and be well.